is everybody? Oh yeah, we're here. And Adriana and Lily will be lighting our flaming chalice.
Our opening words this morning are from Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and they became very popular after the last presidential election. It's not sure exactly when she penned them. This is a redacted version. My friends, do not lose heart. We were made for these times. I have heard from so many recently who are deeply and properly bewildered. They are concerned about the state of affairs in our world now. Ours is a time of almost daily astonishment and often righteous rage over the latest degradations of what matters most to civilized, visionary people. I grew up on the Great Lakes and recognize a seaworthy vessel when I see one. Regarding awakened souls, there have never been more able vessels in the waters than there are right now across the world. And they are fully provisioned and able to signal to one another as never before in the history of humankind. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world within our reach. Any small, calm thing that one soul can do to help another, to assist some portion of this poor, suffering world, will help immensely. It is not given to us to know which acts or by whom will cause the critical mass to tip toward an enduring good. What is needed for dramatic change is an accumulation of acts, adding, continuing. We know that it does not take everyone on earth to bring justice and peace, but only a small, determined group who will not give up during the first, second, or 100th gale. There will always be times when you feel discouraged. I too have felt despair many times in my life, but I do not keep a chair for it. I will not entertain it. It is not allowed to eat from my plate. In that spirit, I hope you will write this on your wall. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe, there can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for. Let us join in the rousing traditional hymn this morning to get us started, God of Grace and God of Glory. It's in your gray hymnals or your Transylvanian covered hymnals, number 115.
Grace
remain risen for our unison affirmation, which you can find in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor, y ayudarnos los unos a los otros.
Good morning. I want to know what your favorite cold weather breakfast is. What's your favorite cold weather breakfast? Oatmeal. Raise hands for oatmeal. I had oatmeal this morning. Whole grain cereal. Okay. Others for whole grain cereal? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. What else? Homemade muffins, hash, and eggs. How many of you had eggs this morning? How many of you haven't had any breakfast at all this morning? You really should be leaving here and going having breakfast. Welcome. Everyone, welcome if you're here for the very first time. Welcome if you have been here absolutely forever. This is a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Our principal affirmations are ones of the use of reason, freedom of belief and unbelief, and a radical inclusion, and we aspire to learn from those other than ourselves. It is good to be here together. All kinds of stuff is going on around here this morning and this afternoon. At 11:45, there will be a special gallery reception. It says 11:30, but it'll be a little later than that, 11:45. We have been given by a generous parishioner whose name is Dorothy Africa, a work of art that commemorates, that honors our work as a sanctuary congregation and as a justice-seeking congregation. The artist is named Tim Brooks, and he was here for a lyceum last year, and he works on the Endangered Alphabet Project, languages that are in danger of extinction. And he has inscribed this piece of art with a quotation from the Ramayana. And he will be here. He came from Vermont today and to talk about it, and Dorothy will be here. And this is a beautiful piece of woodwork and art. At noon, there is the Enneagram workshop, and Annie and Deb are leading that. You know, they say that there are two kinds of people in the world. There are people who think there are two kinds of people, and there are those who do not. And when you do the Enneagram, you'll find out that there are way more than two kinds of people, and you'll learn all kinds of stuff with that. There also will be an effort to flood the phones. We're going to do a phone bank in opposition to the Weymouth compressor station, which is a major fossil fuel project that is going on, and calls will be made to the Massachusetts Department of Environment, and Renu Bostwick is the one who is leading that charge, and so you might look for her after the service. I think that they're going to be meeting in the church office to make a number of phone calls, and we will recognize everybody who made a phone call next Sunday when we will have Jim Antal as our guest preacher. He is a major figure in climate justice work. He is a leader in the United Church of Christ, minister. He is the author of the book that many of you have been reading in common, and there will be a public discussion of that book this coming Wednesday. I'm also putting our membership book up on our pulpit. We report our membership once a year to the Unitarian Universalist Association, and some of you have had the audacity to move away or die. Well, none of you have died. I think you're demonstrably alive. But we have not had a new member since April, and yet we see ourselves as a growing congregation, and indeed we are. And so I am encouraging people who have wondered about membership or who feel ready to call this place their spiritual home to affix, to sign your name in our membership book. I was reading Jim Antal's book yesterday, and in it he quotes Bill McKibben. Somebody once asked Bill McKibben, what is the one most important thing that an individual can do to affect climate change? And Bill McKibben said, stop being an individual. None of us are self-made. We need one another in climate justice work, but really in personal transformation of every kind. We need one another. And our membership book is a way of saying that we're together in this project. And the book is here, and it'll be out for the next couple of Sundays. And if you have questions about any of this, please speak with Annie or with me. But we're ready for your signature when you're ready to say this place is your home as well. And I think I have come to the conclusion of this part of our sacrament. And therefore, I'm turning it over to Deb Weiner.
And I'll go up here. Good morning, everybody. So this is I'm setting Annie up for her sermon because I want to introduce to you a very important woman who you may never have heard about. She was amazing, and her name was Ella Baker. You need to know her story. She was a woman who was a leader of the civil rights movement in the mid-20th century. And she became a leader not because she was rich or highly educated or born to any kind of privilege, but because she was committed to the work and to getting involved, even if she wasn't sure how that involvement would turn out. So, Ella Jo Baker was born on December 13th, 1903 in Norfolk, Virginia. And she grew up in North Carolina, and she heard early on from her grandmother about what life was like as an enslaved person, which her grandmother had been. Ella's grandmother had been whipped for refusing to marry a man chosen for her by her slave owner. Her grandmother's pride and strength in the face of injustice continued to inspire Ella throughout her life. Ella grew up in a time when non-white people were discriminated against, but she managed to go to college, and she studied at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. After graduating in 1927 as the class valedictorian, great honor, with the goal of becoming a medical missionary or social worker, she just kept going. She moved to New York City, and in 1930, she began working on ways to develop Black economic power. While she was doing this work, she connected with an organization that some of the adults, I suspect, have heard of, called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP. And she worked with them in the 1940s, and she worked with local groups, particularly all across the United States during those years. Now, it was very important for her to change what were called Jim Crow laws. Who's heard of Jim Crow laws here? Right. Jim Crow laws, which were horrible laws, made discrimination against non-white people legal, including the lynching or hanging of Black people. One of the famous things that Ella said was, until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons, becomes as important to the rest of the country as the killing of a white mother's son, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. Well, in 1942, Ella Baker became the national director of the NAACP branches in the United States. Now, how many of you have heard of Rosa Parks? Lots of you, right? What was Rosa Parks famous for? Right, the Montgomery bus boycott, indeed. Well, this was an important protest for sure because black people refused to ride the public buses until they were allowed to sit anywhere on the bus and keep their seats instead of having to sit in the back of the bus and give their seats to white people. Now later, Ella worked with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his group of pastors called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. How many people have heard of that? Yeah, good. This group was created because the Montgomery bus boycott was successful and they won. Excuse me. Now, they wanted to fight for more rights. On February 1st, 1960, a group of black college students refused to leave a Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, after no one would serve them. That protest gained support from more and more students, and that was the beginning of a new kind of protest called lunch counter sit-ins. Have you heard of lunch counter sit-ins? Right. Ella left the Southern Christian Leadership Conference after the Greensboro sit-ins. The pastors who were working with Dr. King didn't always trust the students. They sometimes thought young people were too wild and they didn't understand how they were going to be leaders. But Ella knew that their energy was important and she decided to help them be even better leaders. She knew that activists were going to be important. And so she helped to organize another group called SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, in 1960. How many of you have heard about SNCC? Right. So her influence is carried on and on and on through these groups. Now, Ella's influence was reflected in a nickname that she acquired, which was Fundi, F-U-N-D-I. It is a Swahili word meaning a person who teaches a craft to the next generation. And that was certainly Ella Baker. She continued to be a respected and an influential leader for the fight for human and civil rights until her death, December 13th, 1986. That was her 83rd birthday. Ella Baker dreamed big her whole life. She was not taught to do this, but she had a vision of what might be possible with determination, with a commitment to nonviolent change, and with gathering a group of like-minded people around her. So I want to ask you, what does it take to be a change maker? That's really one of the questions I would like to leave you with. The willingness to take risks, the determination to stay in the struggle. That was Ella Baker. Her legacy holds a light for us that can inspire our action this weekend and for the rest of our lives. Now, in that story that I just told you, excuse me, I mentioned that quote from Ella around the importance of understanding that the killing of a black mother's son is as important as the killing of a white mother's son. Well, a musical group called Sweet Honey and the Rock, have you heard of them? Yes, they wrote a song about Ella Baker that was called Ella's Song. And the chorus of the song goes like this: "We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Now, can we try that? I have confidence in you. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. I think you have it. Our children and youth are going to leave as we sing this song to work on our Martin Luther King Day project, which is in room 202. But we're going to try this a couple of times, and we'd like to have you sing this chorus. And someday I hope you will also sing the whole song. So let's try it again. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Again. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Okay, kids, let's go. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
This is a community where we do believe in freedom, and this is a community where we do believe in taking care of one another. In that spirit of freedom and love, let us collect our morning offering. Let it be generous and certainly gratefully received. When Martin Luther King Jr. was a new pastor, 26 years old, in Montgomery, Alabama, he got involved in the Montgomery bus boycott. And to his surprise, once the boycott got going and was going well, they had a meeting of various leaders and especially of the pastors involved in promoting and supporting the action. And they decided to form an organization. That organization would become the Southern Christian Leadership Council, the SCLC, previously mentioned in the story about Ella Baker. And they decided they were going to elect a president, and they elected King. And he was surprised. And after that meeting, they were going to have a mass meeting. And that was how they were organizing. They didn't have social media, of course. They had mass meetings, and everybody would turn out, and they would have a message, and people would come together and get connected and decide what they were going to do next in their movement. So King was met as the new president to give the speech at that mass meeting that night. But they had been meeting all day trying to figure out their new organization, and this is how he describes the situation. It was now 6:30, and I had to leave no later than 6:50 to get to the meeting. This meant that I had only 20 minutes to prepare the most decisive speech of my life. As I thought of the limited time before me and the possible implications of the speech, I became possessed by fear. Each week, I needed at least 15 hours to prepare my Sunday sermon. I don't take that long, but I don't think my sermons are quite as good as Martin Luther King's. He continues. Now I was faced with the inescapable task of preparing, in almost no time at all, a speech that was expected to give a sense of direction to a people imbued with a new and still unplumbed passion for justice. I was also conscious that reporters and television men would be there with their pencils and their sound cameras, poised to record my words and send them across the nation. I was now almost overcome, obsessed by a feeling of inadequacy. In this state of anxiety, I had already wasted 5 minutes of the original 20. Now, I doubt any of us has ever been suddenly called upon to give a decisive speech to turn the tide of racial justice in the country. But I bet that all of us have had a time when we became obsessed with a feeling of inadequacy. And whatever it was that we had to do, we couldn't get past that feeling that we weren't up to the challenge, that we didn't have enough time, that we weren't ready for it. I know I've felt that way many times in my life. But when I think about this particular anecdote, I think about a time when I was quite new in trying on ministry. When I was 24 years old, I did a summer internship at a hospital called Clinical Pastoral Education, and that's where you learn about being a chaplain and you learn pastoral care skills as a young minister in formation, or, well, in my case, I was young, as a minister in formation, whatever your age. And so one of the aspects of this role is to have shifts on call. And I remember that the first time I was on call overnight to be the one chaplain to serve any emergencies that should come up, the first time, nothing happened, and I was relieved. But the second time, there was a code called out on the speaker of the hospital, which meant that the chaplain had to go show up for anything that was life-threatening. And I remember I went to the elevator, and I could barely remember what floor to get off on. I was so similarly obsessed with a feeling of inadequacy. What the heck was I going to do if someone was dying? I was 24 and I'd gone to 1 year of seminary and had done a couple workshops about chaplaincy. They were going to know as soon as they saw me that I couldn't offer anything. And what was I thinking? And who decided to put me in this position? Etc. And I think this can happen to us because so often it's true. We are faced with things we are actually not ready for. And sometimes we've chosen the thing we're not ready for. Like I chose to do a chaplaincy internship, and Martin Luther King chose to take on this leadership role, right? And sometimes we choose a new job, or we choose to get married, we choose to have a child, and we make a choice that makes a big change in our life, but even if we choose it, we might still not feel ready. And then, of course, there's the things that we do not choose, that life throws our way. And so often life throws things at us that we are just not ready for, things that we don't want to be happening. Diagnoses and injuries and losses and conflicts and unforeseen struggles that we just aren't ready for. And then, of course, there's the big picture. I don't think any of us is ready for climate catastrophe. I don't think we're ready for war with Iran. There's a lot of things that we're not ready for. And so I find it actually very comforting to read about Martin Luther King, this person we've lionized and statuified and made into a hero, and how unready he felt when he had to go and give a speech at a mass meeting. But here's what he did. This is what he said about what he did next when he only had 15 minutes left of the original 20 after he'd spent 5 in a state of anxiety. He said, "With nothing left but faith in a power whose matchless strength stands over against the frailties and inadequacies of human nature, I turned to my God in prayer. My words were brief and simple, asking God to restore my balance and to be with me in a time when I needed his guidance more than ever." And while my theological language is different than the language that Dr. King was using in his Christian faith in the Black Baptist Church, I too had a similar way of dealing with my feelings of inadequacy when I was in that elevator. I remember doing a very simple breathing meditation, and I would breathe in, and I would think about pulling in the power of love that I believe is in the universe and in all of us. And when I breathed out, I would imagine breathing out all of the ego attachment, all of the focus on me. And it was a kind of practice of humility, and I think that prayer is also a kind of a practice of humility. A way of saying, well, this is not really about me. This is about something a lot bigger than me. And if you're a Black Baptist preacher, you're going to say, this is about God. And if you're a Unitarian Universalist, you might also say this is about God. But you might say this is about love. This is about my commitment to justice. This is about my integrity. This is about helping someone. It's a way of decentering ourselves to get out of all that chatter of fear and inadequacy, a way of recentering us on what is most important to us, on what sustains us. And I think it is a very important spiritual practice, because when we get into that state of humility, not only can we move forward with less fear, but we're also more open to learning. And that's one of the most wonderful things about doing something that scares us, is we almost always learn something from it. And in fact, in that chaplaincy program, it was an education program. The whole point was that I was supposed to be learning about pastoral care. So maybe it was okay that I didn't already know how to do it. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. Another thing I wasn't ready for was when I had a kid. I kind of thought that maybe I was more ready for that than I thought I was for chaplaincy, but I was wrong. I think I was more ready for chaplaincy. And in those first 6 months or so, it was my community that kept me going. It was me being able to rely on other people, certainly for things like meals and doing the dishes, but also for the emotional support that I didn't know I was going to need. The people who would talk me down when I was freaking out about how I couldn't possibly keep this little human alive, and how could I live the rest of my life and also keep this little human alive, and it seemed impossible. And it was the people who I leaned on and learned to lean on in that time that kept me going, and that was not a practice that I had been particularly accustomed to, leaning on other people for emotional support and to talk me down. I preferred being the talker-downer, the one offering the support. But it was absolutely vital that I lean into that interdependence. And I think that's one of the other key ways that we get ready for the things that we can't be ready for, is by making sure we're strengthening our interdependence. Because we can't get through anything alone. We have to rely on each other to get through. And I know we do a good job of that in this community, trying to create a space where we can reach out for help when we need it, and get those meals, and get those rides, and get that emotional support. And we need to all keep strengthening that practice, because that practice is a practice that can see us through a lot. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these fires. And I know the people working on this movement that we now call the civil rights movement knew about that. They knew that people had to come together and support each other. And they also were learning something very important about coming together across difference. And I think that is another key piece of our interdependence. Now, those mass meetings that I mentioned, those mass meetings included a lot of kinds of different people. This is a way that King described it looking back. The mass meetings also cut across class lines. The vast majority present were working people, yet there was always an appreciable number of professionals in the audience. Physicians, teachers, and lawyers sat or stood beside domestic workers and unskilled laborers. The so-called big Negroes, who owned cars and had never ridden the buses, came to know the maids and the laborers who rode the buses every day. Men and women who had been separated from each other by false standards of class were now singing and praying together in a common struggle for freedom and human dignity. In a common struggle for freedom and human dignity. And I hope we do that here too. And I think we do. When I think about bringing together people who hadn't been previously moving together in a common struggle for freedom and human dignity, what came into my mind was the dinner that John Gibbons mentioned last Sunday, the dinner that we had with our sanctuary guest and her family and her church friends and our sanctuary committee. And there we were. We didn't all speak the same language. We didn't all speak the same theological language either, even when we were having the translation that brought the two languages together. We had a wide variety of different experiences, but when we were gifted with that statue about the full armor of God, that's a very different theological language than most of us are used to in Unitarian Universalism. John said, yes, we are in a spiritual fight, and yes, we are fighting together. A common struggle for freedom and human dignity. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. So, the last piece I want to talk about in getting ready is courage. Now, when I was in seminary, I took a class with the late, great Dr. James Cone, who is a well-known Black liberation theologian who came to prominence in the 1970s. And he taught a class called Martin and Malcolm. And you can probably guess which Martin and which Malcolm that was about. And in that class, Dr. Cone, he was an intense professor, and you had to really actually do your readings if you were going to be in Dr. Cohen's class. You couldn't skim them for like you could for some other classes. And he would just call on you and just ask you a question out of nowhere. And in this class, he was asking us about what was the decisive turning moment for Dr. King. What was the thing that got him, to go into this path he went on, and everybody was guessing all these different things from the readings, and finally he was not satisfied with any of our answers, and he leaned over and he said, "It was the kitchen table moment." And this is what he was talking about. This is also Dr. King recounting this event, and this was also early on in the Montgomery bus boycott. There's a racial slur that I'm not going to say out loud, but you know what it is. After a particularly strenuous day, I settled in bed at a late hour. My wife had already fallen asleep, and I was about to doze off when the telephone rang. An angry voice said, "Listen, N-word, we've taken all we want from you. Before next week, you'll be sorry you ever came to Montgomery." I hung up, but I could not sleep. It seemed that all of my fears had come down on me at once. I had reached the saturation point. Finally, I went up to the kitchen and heated a pot of coffee. I was ready to give up. I tried to think of a way to move out of the picture without appearing to be a coward. In this state of exhaustion, when my courage had almost gone, I determined to take my problem to God. My head in my hands, I bowed over the kitchen table and prayed aloud. The words I spoke to God that midnight are still vivid in my memory. I am here taking a stand for what I believe is right, but now I am afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership, and if I stand before them without strength and courage, they too will falter. I am at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. I've come to the point where I can't face it alone. At that moment, I experienced the presence of the divine as I had never before experienced it. It seemed as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying, "Stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth. God will be at your side forever." King recounts that just 3 days later, his home was bombed. But he says that he accepted this calmly, that he had a new strength and a new trust. His faith was so much stronger than his fear. And I know that faith can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people, but what I'm talking about is not a belief. It wasn't that he had a belief that was stronger than his fear. He had a lot of beliefs, I'm sure, but that wasn't what got him through at the kitchen table. It was his relationship with God. It was an inner voice. It was something embodied and deeply felt and deeply known, something he'd been practicing. Because clearly Dr. King was a praying man. Prayer was not a new thing he was trying out in this moment of need. Prayer was how he got through. It was how he got through that scary speech. And the thing is, prayer might not be the right practice for each of us, but we better have a practice that does work for us. We got to know what we're going to know in our bodies. What is our faith? What is our commitment that we can hold so close to us so that when we are at the end of our powers and we are afraid, there's something there that doesn't let us go. It's very hard to do this, and the way I try is I try to use any opportunity where I'm afraid as a time to practice faith, to practice that commitment. And I got some really good advice from someone recently who said, when you're trying to force yourself to do something that you're afraid to do, in my case, it was making a phone call. I really hate making phone calls. He said, don't think about all the reasons you should do it and like, you have to do this thing. Take a moment to get grounded in your values and who you want to be. And I kind of was like, okay, fine. But I was like, I'll try it. So I tried it. And honestly, it was a really big difference. I took a moment just to be like, who do I want to be in this moment? When I had to make a phone call that was making me really nervous. And the whole time the phone was ringing, I was saying in my head, I am brave, I am brave, I am brave, which is very cheesy and silly, and I'm not usually an affirmations person, but I gotta tell you, it really made an impact. So whatever your thing is, whatever area of life you can practice moving through your fear, make sure you're practicing, because we don't know when we're gonna need it the most, but we wanna make sure we're as ready as we can be when that time comes. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. These times are terrifying, there is no doubt. And I am very scared. I am scared that I brought a child into a world that is dying and going to hell. I am scared that a fascist is going to steal the next election in the United States. I'm scared. But I also have faith. I believe in us. I believe in our interconnection. I believe that it's not just about me and it's not just about you, that there's something bigger than us. And I believe that we can be brave. I've seen us doing it. We are worthy vessels out there, like Clarissa Pinkola Estes says. We are worthy vessels. And the more we practice being humble, being connected, and being brave, the more and more ready we will be for the personal times that we need it and for the big picture. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change and life from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to It is time now. Time to learn to lead in love. Time to get ready. Time to keep moving through the things that we choose and the things we don't choose and the times that are upon us. Because if we stay connected and lean into our values, we can make it through. We can chart a way, and we can learn to lead in love. May it be so.